I've always been a huge Star Trek fan and consider myself a Trekker, and I make no secret that I am disappointed with the current era of Star Trek adventures, especially under the leadership of Alex Kurtzman, who has pretty much destroyed any goodwill that the fans might have had post Star Trek Discovery. However, one thing has kind of restored my faith in Star Trek. Not from CBS or any of the places that might have produced Star Trek. This came from a fan, and it featured the great William Shatner.
Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side.
Hi everyone, my name is Jacob Harry. Welcome to the StudioJake vidcast where I talk about all things pop culture. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and if you're watching on YouTube, ring that little bell so you get notifications when I post a new vidcast, and consider becoming a channel member. Alright, like I said, I grew up watching Star Trek. I was first introduced to Star Trek through The Next Generation, where of course Patrick Stewart portrayed Captain Jean-Luc Picard. But I have since, way back then, have gone back and have rewatched the original series, which has a special place in my heart. I've watched Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Enterprise, and I found something to love about all of them. William Shatner portrayed Captain Kirk, who was taking the Enterprise on a 5-year mission to explore the Alpha Quadrant. It had barely been looked at even at this point, and he manages to avoid war. He manages to find new planets and connect with new species. Then, of course, we get to the Next Generation, where the Alpha Quadrant is pretty much explored. Starfleet has just survived a war against the Cardassian Empire, and Jean-Luc Picard, he is different than Kirk, whereas Kirk was more of an adventurer and explorer. Captain Picard is more of a scientist and archaeologist. He looks at the philosophy and the culture behind a thing instead of trying to figure out how to make the next move. He looks at it more analytically. Then, of course, we have Captain Benjamin Sisko, who doesn't start out as a captain but gets promoted as the series goes on. He has to face a totally new threat when he gets exposed to some wormhole aliens that then makes him look like a prophet to a certain group of aliens where his space station is. And that changes things and challenges him, especially when Starfleet is forced to go to war with the Cardassian Empire once again. Star Trek Voyager saw us with the first ever female captain to lead a show, that of course being Captain Janeway. She is a scientist as well, but unlike Picard, she doesn't necessarily try to look at everything super analytically. She also follows her gut and instincts, especially when her starship gets flung into deep space and it's going to take their ship at least 70 years to get back home. And along the way, they make new allies, new enemies, and of course, have many encounters with my favorite Star Trek villain, the Borg. Finally, we get to Captain Archer. He is new to this. Humanity has just discovered warp drive, and he has to take on totally new and different challenges, though they might be familiar to us because they're connected to Next Generation and the original series. To this starship, it's totally new. The NX-01 Enterprise goes on these adventures, and it is something really interesting. And I know that series didn't have a really good ending, but it still felt like Star Trek. We get, of course, to the Kurtzman era, where Star Trek Discovery had a promising look because it takes place during Starfleet's war with the Klingon Empire, and we see new characters but also old ones, and it does some soft rebooting that no one wanted. Although I will say I did like Anson Mount as Captain Pike. I think he makes a good Captain Pike. Then, of course, it has spin-offs. I haven't watched any of them, so I can't say. We got exposed to Lower Decks, which is probably one of the worst animated shows I've ever seen. And then, of course, we get to Picard, which should have been about Picard bringing together a new generation. So he was the next generation. He should have brought a new generation of Starfleet captains, but instead it was all about putting him down so it could uplift strong female leads. And then they did course correct, I'm told, in the final season of the show, so good for them, but still not enough to win everyone like me back. Now, I pretty much, when I hear a new Star Trek announcement, as long as Alex Kurtzman is there, I have no desire to watch it. However, some accounts that I follow started talking about this new fan film called Unification, and it has a code number to it. And now there will be some spoilers for it, but I wanted to just talk about it, about how it gave me new hope for Star Trek. So it kind of opens with a montage of scenes. We see Spock go to the gravesite of his friend, Captain Kirk, and then we see a scene of Enterprise D, which was commanded by Jean-Luc Picard. It's crashed, and we see a whole bunch of other montage stuff connected to Star Trek, and then we see a guy named Gary Mitchell, who in Star Trek, he was a human who got exposed to some sort of evolutionary machine, and it started to evolve him to the point where the Enterprise and Captain Kirk had no choice but to stop him by any means necessary. And we see him kind of floating, his eyes are glowing like they did in the show, and it's like he senses Spock's presence at Kirk's grave. Then we see Kirk. First, we don't recognize him, but he's walking through sort of this very lovely atmosphere of foliage. We get to a place where he sees some old friends, some new friends, and he sees this alien Starfleet officer who hands him his badge. He then walks down this dark corridor and he sees a light at the end of the tunnel. As he approaches this light, though, he reflects on his past. We see him in his original Starfleet uniform, the young captain who's one of the youngest to ever command the flagship. Then we see him as he was when he faced Khan in his maroon uniform. And then we see him as he is now, and they all kind of look at each other. But then he moves on as he was in Star Trek Generations. And he comes into this room. We see this beautiful landscape, and we see a bed. And there lies Ambassador Spock. The two old friends look at one another and clutch each other's hands, and they look out into the final frontier. That is what Star Trek is all about. Now, this was a fan film, but it did feature William Shatner reprising his role as Captain Kirk, although he did say that a younger actor performed his younger looking self. They used prosthetics and a little bit of CGI to make him look more like Kirk. And I just found it to be very emotional, especially being a longtime Star Trek fan, to watch a franchise that I once loved turn into a joke by a bunch of young, overachieving academics who don't actually know about Star Trek, who don't know the rich history. How Gene Roddenberry envisioned humanity being above its problematic tendencies, how we've gone forward, and then only for Discovery to unravel that, to put in modern politics and political messaging that no one gives a crap about into Star Trek. It was hopeful, it was optimistic about humanity's future. And even in the darkest days of Deep Space Nine, which obviously featured a war, it was holding on to those ideals that kept us going. And listen, I'm not looking back totally in the past with rose colored glasses. I think DS9 sort of fumbled the ball when it came to Cisco's connection to the wormhole aliens. I think the finale of Star Trek Enterprise was a disaster, and it focused too much on being a prequel. And I think Voyager could have been more survivalistic. Even though that was touched on several times, I think it should have been the main theme instead of just something that they touched on a couple of times a season, is all I'm saying. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everything was perfect back in the Bergman and Roddenberry days. Certainly not. And, I haven't even touched on the films. Now, the Kelvin timeline, I'm not going to talk about in this video just because this is about the original timeline. So if you want me to talk about the Kelvin timeline, leave me a comment. I just wanted to say that Unification was really beautifully done, and I applaud the team that put this together, the filmmakers behind it. They did a fantastic job. You should try to find a link to it and watch it, especially if you're a Star Trek fan, because it really takes us beyond what we could have hoped for. A proper ending for Captain Kirk, for Ambassador Spock, two old friends, the most popular by any measure of the Star Trek characters, who are looking out into the distance at that final frontier and saying goodbye one last time. I do think it is emotional, so get yourself ready for that. But hopefully, the makers behind Star Trek, whether it be CBS or Paramount or whoever buys Paramount, because Paramount is apparently up for sale, I hope that they see the fan reaction to this little fan film And I'm not saying little to demean it. I mean, it's little as in it's short. I hope that they will see the fan reaction to that and say, hey, that's what we need to do to bring back the fans to a once great franchise. If you liked that video, be sure to give it a like, share it out to all your friends, leave me a comment and tell me what you think, and subscribe. If you want to find more stuff, including some of my reviews for things like Star Trek, head on over to my website, StudioJakeMedia.com. You can sign up for free with your email, and there are no ads, so you don't risk anything there. If you want to support the channel, head on over to my locals community. It's kind of like a Patreon meets Discord. I post articles there, and you can send me tips for those articles, including some exclusive ones, or you can become a monthly subscriber. If you really want to support me, head on over and pick up one or all of my books. I've got the supernatural thriller Cacophony. I've got the Sword and Sorcery book series, The Seven Royals, which includes book 1, All Good Things, book 2, Breaking the Stars, book 3 is on its way, and my latest book, the novella Blessed Child. You can pick up one or all of them, leave me a 5-star review. It really helps out small indie creators like myself. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.
Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side, PCH country limit. I don't need a guide, follow lights, take me where I wanna visit. Are you alive? Or just breathing? Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any minute. Going for a ride down the side, PCH country limit. I don't need a guide, follow lights, take me where.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starfleet officers, their ongoing mission to seek out new life and new civilization, to boldly go where no one has gone before.